going to go ahead and move over to the back end work, okay? So we wrapped up most of our front end work, and we are going to move on to the back end. Our first task that we need to do is to create a user's, like a user table, an entity, okay? So I have this folder here for users, okay? I am going to create a folder within the folder, and I'm going to call it entities, all right? That is going to match how I have my migration set up in my config, okay? Because in my config, it's going to look for entities in the dist folder. Then every folder within the dist folder, it's going to look for a folder called entities, and then it's going to look for any JS or TS file within there, okay? So I need in my dist folder then a users folder and then an entities folder, and then within that I can create my user.entity.ts, okay? So I'm going to head over to the authentication Nest.js docs, all right? And this is really where most of the work for creating my user is going to be, okay? I'm going to start out with just getting the entity created, running my database, my database migration, and then creating the functions I need to add a user to that database table, okay? And then we'll worry about the authentication piece of it. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm in my API folder here, and I'm going to say nest g module users, okay? And as you can see, it's going to add a module, right, for me within the users folder. And then I'm going to add a service, so nest g service users, all right? I am not going to add a controller right now because everything is going to come through my auth controller, because anything I'm doing with adding a user or getting user data, right, that is going to need to be on my protected route. So I will have that route within the auth controller, and then it will feed into the auth service, which will then feed into the user service. That's going to be kind of the workflow that we're going to go through, okay? All right. So if you're following along in the Nest.js docs, you will see that they are going to create, instead of using the database, they are going to create a little users array and then use that in order to add and take out, all right? We are not going to do that. We're going to use our actual database, okay? But let's go ahead and edit our module as we need to. So it looks like we're good so far in terms of providers. We're going to have our user service, but we also want to add our user service to our exports, so that way we can use that user service within our auth module. Okay, so let's go ahead and we're going to, so see how they're injecting it into the constructor here? We are going to do that too, but first we need to add it to the users module to our imports in our auth. Okay? So let's go to our auth module. All right. And we are going to add an imports array where we are going to import the users module. Okay. Alrighty. And then we can go ahead and, because we're going to call the user service from our auth service, let's add a constructor here. All right, so that way we can do that. So we're going to have private users service. It's going to be from our users service class. All right, so now we should be able to call a function that's within our user service here in the auth service. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to flip over now that I have those things connected. Okay, I'm going to flip over to Nest.js database entity. so that way I can create my user entity. All right, so here's the file that we used a while ago to set up. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this entity here and then edit as I need. Okay. So we have class user, rid of the primary generated column, that's fine for ID, and then we don't have this column, so I'm actually going to open up my form so I can see what I am doing. So we're going to have a name, that's a string. We're going to have an email, that's a string. And then we're going to have a username, string, and password, string. And we are not going to right now have a column for is active, but that's actually a good idea. So something to consider in the future. All right, and then let's make sure that matches our sign up DTO: name, email, username, password. Name, email, username, password. Okay, perfect. All right, so now, all right, I want to go ahead and I want to take a look at my database. All right, so I am going to find the database that I'm using. All right. And I'm going to pull this down real quick so I can see what database I'm using, because I'm going to do that in my env. Okay, so my database name is to-do list. All right, so that's going to be this one. Let's refresh. Let's take a look. I'm going to view all rows. All right, so I already have this set up, but this was when I did the Zoom session. So I am going to go ahead and I'm going to drop this table and I'm going to refresh. Okay, so that is dropped. This isn't gonna come up because this doesn't exist, all right? And then let's look at I'm gonna drop my migrations table too. You shouldn't have to do any of this though, in terms of dropping your tables, unless you're doing this multiple times like I am. Okay, so now we have that. Let's go ahead and look in our migrations folder. This is when I first set up just like my test entity, so I'm gonna delete that migration too because I don't need to set up a test entity. So my migrations folder is now empty. I'm going to go ahead and open my package.json so I can see my migration generate command. And I am going to change the name that I'm going to do it with, and I'm going to say create user table. Okay. Then I'm going to say npm run migration generate, and I'm going to hope it works. All right. Migration has been generated successfully. Okay. So if you look, our migration is here. All right. I'm going to go look in my dist folder, migrations. And it looks like we still have the test entities, but it did create it. So I'm going to actually run npm run builds. I'm going to delete my dist folder just because I want to make sure everything's perfect. And I'm going to npm run build. And then I'm going to check out that migrations folder within the dist folder again. And that looks better to me. We just have to create user table. Perfect. So now that I have my migration, I should be able to use my migration run. Okay, so I'm going to say npm run migration run. All right, that looks pretty good. Other than it did create a test one. So let's take a look at that. So let's refresh, and it looks like it did create the test, which is interesting, with my potato in it. Okay, so it looks like it added the test. I must have my test entity somewhere then, so let's take a look. Oh, yep, I have my test entity in a database folder, so I'm gonna go ahead and delete that. All right, and I am going to, I'm gonna close out on everything so I can get a better look. Okay, so yes, when you are running this migrations command, if you look in your TypeORM setup, it's going to be looking in the dist folder for any entities folder within a folder. So I had a database folder with entities folder in it, and then it ran the migration on it. So it's kind of what's great about migrations, right? Is it can do that for you. Okay, so I'm going to delete my migration. Okay, I'm going to delete my dist folder. All right. And then I am going to drop my tables. And again, you shouldn't have to do this yourself because you should be building one application and not the same application multiple times. All right, so let's do migration generate. And it says we don't have any npm run build. Okay. All right, so our migration was generated correctly. So we have it here, and it looks like, yep, it's just creating the table user this time. So then now let's go ahead and run the migration. All right, I don't see a test table, so I think we are all set up. So we have our users table. Let's go ahead and view that, what that looks like. And it looks like we have all of the appropriate columns. So yay. All right, so I can go ahead and I can check that off. We have a user table created. All right, the next thing that we are going to do then is we're going to create the sign up function that creates a new user in the user table and returns a JWT response from the login function. All right, I'm gonna edit this a little bit and returns a JWT. Right, okay. So yes, we are going to do this. We're going to do this in parts though, all right? We're not going to worry about the JWT right now. We are just going to worry about creating the user in the user table, okay? So let's take a look. Our auth controller gets that sign up DTO. It then calls the auth service, okay? Which then just console logs, okay? And returns a fake token. So here instead, we are going to add user to user table, okay? So we are going to need a function within the user service to do that, all right? So let's go ahead and create that. All right. We are going to call it create user. So async create user, right? We're going to be passing in user data. That's going to match the sign up DTO. Okay. And then we are going to do const user is equal to await this dot users repository. But we don't have a users repository. So that is going to be the next thing that we have to do. Okay. So this isn't mad at us. Let's just console log user. Perfect, so now it's not mad. And then let's go ahead and link these, okay? So we're gonna say this dot user service dot create user with the sign up DTO. Perfect. All right, I'm going to take this console log out because we already know we're there. All right, and now we're in the user service. Okay, so let's go back to here and let's try to figure out how we inject our repository. All right, and here's how we inject the repository. We use a constructor. All right, let's go ahead and import. the imports we need. All right. And now we should be able to say return await this dot users repository dot save, and we are going to save the user. Okay, so it looks like it wants us to use there. So we're going to use the spread operator, and now we have some issues. All right. It's saying, is users module a valid Nest.js module? All right. So we need to make sure that we have it. It is being imported there, so that's good. Nest.js cannot resolve dependencies of the user's service. Okay. Let's look here. Do we need to add the user service here? Nope. All right, let's look at our docs. Oh, it's always where you always just need to look at the docs. All right, so if I look in my users module here, okay, you can see that I need to import the TypeORM for feature with user. So we're going to copy this and add this to, well, we don't have an imports array yet, so we are going to add it. Let's go ahead and import TypeORM and import our user. Let's save. And we should be good. Okay, so to test this now, we can go ahead and do our sign up. All right, so I'm going to click post. I should see my user here and it should save it in the database. Okay, I see my user, that's a sign up DTO there, and I got a fake token returned, so that's pretty good. And then if I pull open my database and I refresh, I should see my user. Perfect. That's great. The issue though is that we are just putting our password in here, and that is not what we want to do, okay? We don't want to just have a password hanging out. We want to hash the password, all right? So we are going to use bcrypt for that. So I'm going to now go look up bcrypt. All right, and I'm going to go to where I'm installing, and I'm going to install it. All right, and then let's check out the docs to see how we do this. All right, we installed it. All right. All right, so it looks like we're going to use bcrypt hash and then pass in our plain text and the salt rounds. Okay. So before we save it in the database, we want to make sure that we hashed our password. So that's going to be done in the auth service file. Okay. So we are going to hash our password. All right, so I'm going to add a method within our auth service, and I'm going to say async hash password. We will pass a password in. Okay, then I'm going to copy this. I'm going to use the same salt rounds. Okay. And then my plain text password is what's being passed in, okay? And then I'm going to do the bcrypt hash. And I'm going to pass in my password and the amount of salt rounds, okay? This password is going to be a string, all right? And then I'm going to return that hashed password. You can see I have a red squiggly line. It's because I don't have it imported. So let's go ahead and look at how we are going to import. All right, let's go ahead and try this one. Okay. So I'm going to then, I want to hash my password here. So I'm going to say const hashed password is going to be equal to await hash password. And I'm going to pass in signupdto.password. Okay. I need to make this async then as well. All right, then I'm going to just console log my hashed password here. Okay. So I should not see the password hashed in the database when I add this, okay? But I should see it console logged hashed if this worked. I'm gonna press send up, and we have an issue. It can't read hash. All right, so that's gonna tell us that our import was not done correctly, so I'm going to import like this instead, and I'm gonna give it a try. All right, perfect. So we have a hashed password now, and it still made it to our user service, and then if I refresh, look, we have our data. Still not hashed though, because we are not editing our signupdto. So we are going to go ahead and do that. We're going to say signupdto @password is equal to hashed password. All right, now let's go ahead and try it again. And let's refresh. And our password is hashed. That's awesome. The issue though that I'm seeing here is that when we are creating users, I'm using the same data every single time. So I have 3 Stows cups all with the same email. And that's just not going to work in the real workplace, right? You can't have an app where you have 3 people with the same username. We can only have 1 username, okay? So what we want to do here then is we're going to want to first check if user already exists, okay? So we're gonna check if the username already exists, and then we are going to check if the email already exists, okay? And this is where some of the error handling is gonna happen. I'm going to just leave these in comments for now because we're gonna add these edge cases a little bit later, but it's good to kind of make sure you have a to-do list of what you need to do still in your code. All right, this is where we are going to pause then, because our next portion of things is going to be to set up let's go ahead and look at our user story. We're gonna have to do our auth guard and our JWT, and we're gonna have to do our email service next. So this is where we're gonna end the video, and I will see you in the next one.